read over 3 pages in Volume 3 of his monumental work, History of the Christian Church, the author Philip Schaff makes a compelling argument for why it was inevitable that Christianity would eventually emerge from the Roman catacombs to join the state in governing the hearts and the lives of the people of the empire. And while it was inevitable to Schaff, he describes how the merger resulted in the corruption of the church. He wrote, quote, "The Christianizing of the state amounted in great measure to the paganizing and the secularizing of the church." Now, we've already seen how the church at Rome emerged to become a headquarters of Western Christianity. We need to spend a little more time here, as this period of church history is crucial for understanding the eventual rift that occurred between the East and the West, and what emerged in Europe after this, not only for the church, but for the nations that eventually rose there. The idea of the rule of the entire church by the Roman Pope was a slow and halting process. The title of Pope or Papa wasn't really important to the emergence of the Bishop of Rome as the leader of the church. It was a term of affection used by many Christians for their pastor, but was used in a more formal sense in Alexandria decades before it was used of the Roman bishop. It wasn't until the 6th century that the word Pope was reserved exclusively for Rome's bishop, long after he claimed primacy as the Apostle Peter's singular successor. It's important as well that we make a distinction between the honor that the Roman Church held and the overarching authority its bishop later claimed. Now, there's ample evidence of the respect accorded Rome's Christian community. Rome was, after all, the capital of the empire. The church there was large and quite wealthy. By the mid-3rd century, it claimed some 30,000 members, served by 150 priests, and it was supporting 1,500 widows and the poor. It had a long record of remaining orthodox while winds of doctrine were spinning others about. And not unimportantly, it was known for its generosity. Now, for these reasons, the Roman Church was regarded as the lead church of the Western Empire. Though there's no real historical evidence to support it, Christians of the 3rd through 4th centuries believed that Peter and Paul had founded the church at Rome. It was assumed that each bishop of Rome handed his authority and office to his successor, so that the sitting pope, whoever that was the successor in the apostolic seat of Peter. Now, we can understand why this would be important when the Gnostics were a threat to the faith. They claimed to possess special secret knowledge and traditions that had been passed down by Jesus to the apostles and then to them. In contrast to this fiction, the Romans could name their bishops all the way back to the original apostles. Now, that list was memorized by young believers like state capitals are memorized by students today. While the church at Rome was regarded with great respect, that honor didn't always extend to its bishop. There's evidence from church leaders like Irenaeus and Cyprian who disagreed vehemently with positions taken by the Bishop of Rome. Until Constantine, there's no evidence that the church at large took direction from Rome's lead pastor. Now, it's important at this point to speak about the changes that took place in the structure of the churches during the 3rd and the 4th centuries. That change came about for 2 reasons: councils and archbishops. The first development that led to an alteration in the way that churches developed was church councils. As the faith grew and congregations popped up in more and more places, church leaders recognized the need to coordinate their efforts and their teaching. The emergence of heretics prompted elders and pastors to gather to discuss how to address the challenge of these new false teachings. These gatherings were at first informal and irregular, called at random by provincial leaders. In the 3rd century, they began meeting annually in more formal councils to share news, establish policy to be observed then in each of the churches of that region. These provincial councils proved so helpful, in the 4th century, several provinces started sending their bishops to larger regional councils. When Constantine became emperor and the churches faced major obstacles, the call was sent out for all the bishops to meet. The first such general or ecumenical council, as there was known, was held in 314 at Arles, although only leaders of the Western Church were summoned. The first true all-church council was held at Nicaea, not far from the capital at Constantinople, in 325, and dealt with the threat of Arianism, a subject that we've already dealt with. The findings of these general councils became the rule for the entire church, wherever it met. The second development that helped shape the church was the emergence of archbishops. Now, during the provincial and regional councils, all bishops were supposed to be equal, but in practice, some bishops of larger, older, and more respected churches, well, they were held in higher regard. Also, as the church grew, it tended to locate first in urban centers and then would reach out to the surrounding rural countryside where smaller churches sprang up, usually led by pastors that had been sent out by the pastor bishop of the nearest urban center. It was natural that these rural pastors would look to their sending church as their spiritual home and their sending pastor as their spiritual leader. In other words, rural bishops looked to urban bishops as their archbishop. He might in turn look to some other bishop of an even larger city closer to Rome, or Alexandria, or Antioch, or Constantinople as his spiritual overseer. So while all bishops were theoretically equal, practically they related to one another in a more hierarchical way, a hierarchy based on the size and prominence of the church in the city where the bishop served. Now you can see where this is going, can't you? Put church councils attended by archbishops together with a church suddenly given access to imperial favor, it's in a Pandora's box of political scheming. The move of the empire's capital from Rome to Constantinople in 330 shifted the center of political gravity 900 miles to the east. Because location and proximity to political power had become increasingly important, Constantinople was added to the list of Christian centers, and the Bishop of Constantinople became another major player. When Theodosius became emperor in 379 and made Christianity the official state religion, church politics moved to a whole new level. Hundreds feigned conversion and entered the church to gain political advantage. As we tracked in an earlier episode, in May of 381, Emperor Theodosius convened a general council in Constantinople, but only called the eastern bishops to attend. Bishop Damasus I of Rome wasn't even invited. Theodosius wanted to close the book on Arianism, and so he convened the council to endorse and ratify the Nicene Creed. The eastern bishops decided to use the council to raise their political coin by also ruling that the Bishop of Constantinople was second only to the Bishop of Rome in terms of authority. They based that on the premise that Constantinople was the new Rome. When word reached Damasus in Rome, he recognized this move by the council for what it was, a political power play. He and the other Western bishops responded with their own council a year later. They declared that the Roman Church's prominence was not due to its proximity to the political capital of some earthly realm, but because of its historical connection to the apostles Peter and Paul. It was from this council at Rome in 382 that the church first claimed the primacy of the Roman Church based on Jesus' supposed remark that he would build his church on Peter. Now, it was clear by the end of the 4th century that East and West were headed in very different directions. And the Eastern Church, with its center at Constantinople, became increasingly tied to imperial power. In the West, things were dramatically different. Imperial power and presence were dissolving. The church wasn't only untying from political structures. As those structures themselves dissolved, the church was increasingly looked to by the common people to provide governance. So after Damasus, the Roman bishop most responsible for the emergence of the papal office was Leo the Great. Leo was a nobleman and a politician who was made Bishop of Rome when Sextus III died in AD 440. Leo's 21-year term as pope saw some of Rome's most tumultuous years. He drew on themes already in place to support his primacy over the church, the entire church. Now, it's at this point that I need to say that we're going to deviate from our usual course and toss out some things that may upset our Roman Catholic friends. But this is a period of church history that speaks specifically to the issue of the primacy of the papacy. Trust me, when we get to later church history, we're going to have lots of tough stuff to look at regarding the Protestants. Leo's use of Matthew 16 to bolster his claim that the Roman Pope was the spiritual successor to Peter, and so the leader of the church, holding spiritual authority over other church leaders, flies in the face of Jesus' clear teaching that his followers are not to ape the world's patterns of power and rule. The great are to serve, Jesus said. As Bruce Shelley notes in his marvelous Church History in Plain Language, the primacy of Peter as the leader of the church is difficult to glean from Matthew 16 when just a few verses later, Jesus rebuked Peter, calling him Satan. Peter denied the Lord at his trial, and even after the filling of the Holy Spirit recorded in Acts chapter 2, the Apostle Paul rebuked him for being a poor example. Another reason to question the primacy of Peter and the apostolic succession of the popes is to ask, where in the Bible does Jesus commission Peter to a role as a bishop of Rome? While Peter certainly went to Rome, there's nothing to suggest that he was ever the head of the church there. He was martyred and buried there, but that's a far cry from his ever being a bishop of the Roman fellowship. From a simple historical perspective, until the time of Damasus and Leo, while Rome's bishop was certainly regarded as a major leader, he wasn't considered the leader, that is, the leader of the entire church. The evidence makes clear that both Damasus and Leo were astute enough to see that with Christianity's imperial acceptance, power would aggregate in fewer and fewer locations. Those locations were Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome. Rome was the only city in the West. The other three were in the East. And with the political center now being in the East, Rome knew that it faced the very real threat of becoming irrelevant, as the church at Jerusalem, of all places, had already gone. And so the bishops of Rome played their trump card. They were the one church to whom the names Peter and Paul had some historical connection. In our next episode, we'll see how Leo the Great helped fix Rome as the center of the faith.